Hi, everybody. It's Patrick Heffernan from TBR. We're going to give some of the stragglers a couple more minutes, well, really just 1 minute to join us. So we'll start in just about a minute from now. Thanks. Just hold tight. Okay, thanks for holding on. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the TBR webinar series. Today, myself, Patrick Heffernan, I'm joined by three of my colleagues, and we're going to talk about management consulting. We're talking about COVID and what's been happening to management consulting. This is the second webinar in a week. We did one last week at this time as well, and we've got another one next Thursday. So when you have a chance, please go on the website and register for those. Before we get into the content, a couple of housekeeping things. Bottom of the screen, series of buttons from left to right. You can access the slides, the audio controls, the Q&A, our bios, and then a survey. And after the webinar is over, you're going to get an email that will give you a chance to register for the webinars I mentioned, and also a chance to reach out to us if you have any further questions. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them there. We can see them, and we'll get to them as we go along. And so for folks who are new to TBR, I just want to explain, and I know there's a mix here on this call, but I want to explain why our market research is a little different than a lot of others that are out there. So we're structured around the individual vendors. Each one of our analysts is dedicated to looking at the performance and the strategy of vendors in a particular space, and then we build up our broader understanding of what's happening in the market as a whole by understanding the performance and the strategies and the competitive alignments and the go-to-market and the sales strategies and the resource planning and all that, all the vendors that we cover. So if you look at the people that are going to be talking today, Elitsa Bakalova is our lead analyst on IBM. She's our lead on Atos and Capgemini and a few other companies. She also leads our management consulting benchmark research. She is also our lead on IT services. Kelly Lesiczka is our lead analyst for EY, for PwC, for McKinsey. She's also our lead analyst on Fujitsu and HCL. And in addition, she is going to be our lead on management consulting in the new year. And then finally, Boz Hristov is our lead analyst on Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, and Infosys, and he leads our digital transformation portfolio as a whole. So when we go throughout this webinar, there will be examples or things that we'll cite specific to some of those vendors that these analysts cover. And then if you have broader questions about the market as a whole, we can tackle that. But then if you have questions about those specific vendors, we can talk about those as well. So what are we going to cover today? Pretty straightforward. You know, what's been happening in the management consulting space in 2020? What are the things that we think are going to be happening next year and beyond? And then, of course, you know, what is happening to the demand for customer experience-centric advisory, which has changed, and Boz is going to tackle that directly towards the end of the webinar. I wanted to, before we dive into some of the numbers, I did want to put sort of three broad trends out there, because I think this is one of the most important things as we wrap up the year, is looking at what has really happened because of the pandemic and what we expect to happen coming in the future. We're going to go into these in a little bit detail, but I want to put them out there right now so you know what's coming, you know where sort of our thinking is at, and you can take, when we start talking through the numbers, you can sort of understand that that's influencing our thinking on the trend. So the biggest change, of course, is hybrid engagements, and not hybrid IT, not hybrid cloud, but hybrid delivery of consulting engagements and hybrid engagements all the way around. It is something that everyone had to adjust to at the start of the pandemic, that is delivering remotely. But as we've all gotten used to being in a pandemic, in a COVID environment, we're starting to see vendors, consultancies bringing people back into the offices, bringing clients back into the offices, going on client sites, starting to figure out exactly how to deliver in a way that's a mix of people being remote and people being on site. That's not going to change in the near term. We're still going to have that hybrid engagement model going forward, but it does have a lot of implications on the business models that the consultancies use and deploy. It's going to have a big difference on the way that consulting is sold, has been having an impact already, and is going to continue to. A second one that I think is really important is around products and technology. By products, I mean platforms and software, really. And we have been talking about emerging technologies as a part of consulting for years and years now, and so the way that emerging technology has permeated all aspects of consulting. I think we turned a corner at the beginning of this year, particularly when PwC launched PwC products, but it had been brewing for a while, where it's no longer just that emerging technology permeates all aspects of consulting. It's that these software offerings, these platforms, these products are actually part of the business model for the consultancies. So being a software company is now part of who these firms are. And I think it's important to understand that that's a business model shift that is going to continue into 2021. And there will be implications on the way that they go to market, on the way that they sell, on the way that they engage with their clients. And then the last thing I want to talk about, or that we're going to get to, but I want to keep in everybody's mind as we start off this webinar, is the idea of decarbonization, just climate change as a whole. It was a trend that began towards the middle to end of 2019, where there was more noise about decarbonization and climate change than we had seen previously from a lot of the management consultancies. I think our expectation early on in the pandemic was that it might go away because there were certainly other things to get worried about. That's not been the case. We've actually seen broader and more concrete commitments from some of the vendors that we cover in this particular space. And I think, based on everything that we're seeing and hearing, I think that's going to be true. I was actually listening to a presentation this morning from SAP's CTO, and he was talking about one of their highest priorities is tackling climate change. So if a company like SAP is all over it still, even as we're all dealing with this pandemic, I think you're going to see it's going to continue going on. So with that, I'm going to finally get to some numbers, and I'll let Elitsa walk through what's on this slide. Elitsa?
Thank you, Patrick. So this is a bigger picture with the annual performance for the 13 vendors that we include in the management consulting benchmark, and we publish this benchmark on a semi-annual basis. Our revenue estimations show a significant deceleration in management consulting revenue growth during 2020 compared to 2019 and 2018. The figures on this slide are collectively for the 13 vendors in the benchmark, and we'll refine our estimates as we get closer to the year. However, we don't really anticipate the large deviations from the nearly flat, low single-digit revenue growth that we are expecting in 2020. The reasons for the deceleration are the high levels of uncertainty that the pandemic caused over the past several months now, and the clients' tightening of discretionary spending and sometimes postponement of projects in time. Vendors have also been challenged by the limitations to travel due to social distancing requirements to keep the virus from spreading. So the shift of workforces to deliver management consulting services from home was initially negatively affecting employee utilization and pressuring revenue generation. While multiple vendors are challenged by decreasing signings growth, and they had to place parts of their employees on the bench due to lower business volumes in the past quarters. But management consultancies have been constantly adjusting their portfolios and their delivery models to capture the immediate opportunities from clients around running their businesses during the crisis. We've also seen vendors launch multiple new offerings around supporting healthcare and public service organizations, for example, in the efforts for those organizations to fight the virus and address increased demand around services that help adopt new delivery models, new ways of working, digitalization and automation driven by the pandemic. If we move to the next slide, we have the revenue growth for each of the 13 vendors in the management consulting benchmark. The dark green represents 1H20 year-to-year revenue growth. The light green is the comparative year-to-year growth for 1H19. We can clearly see the shift of revenue growth to the left side of the graph, indicating deceleration in growth and revenue declines for some of the vendors. This is management consulting specifically. And in terms of the average revenue growth, it declined from 7% year-to-year in 1H19 to 1% year-to-year in 1H20. The top two vendors in the graph, Capgemini and Bain, they lead in revenue growth. However, their performance has been boosted by recent acquisitions, such as Capgemini's acquisition of Ultron, which brought in the Cambridge consultancy entity to Capgemini Invent, and Bain's acquisitions of Quartz in Denmark. This is management consultancy based in Denmark, and Pixis, a US-based data analysis specialist. So when we peel out the contributions from acquisitions, revenue growth for the vendors is also negatively affected on an organic basis. Number three vendor, Accenture, was able to hold a relatively steady revenue growth performance in 1H20 compared to 1H19. Accenture is continuously making tuck-in acquisitions to expand offerings, to enhance industry expertise, and to strengthen presence in local markets. The company is also expanding its diamond client roster and investing in digitally versed sales staff and establishing cloud as the backbone to transformation-led discussions. So it's been able to use those levers to mitigate the negative effects of the crisis compared to the rest of the peers listed on the graph. On the next slide, we compare vendors' management consulting revenue growth with revenue growth for the rest of their services, again, 1H20 versus 1H19. For the majority of the companies, management consulting revenues grew slower year to year in 1H20 compared to the rest of the business segments. So if we look at some of the specific vendors, Accenture was able to balance revenue growth across its service lines, and I'll let Boz speak a little bit about Accenture. The big four firms have been expanding their activities around systems integration and managed services over the past few years. And while for EY, PwC, and KPMG, such segments account for less than 5% of total revenue, Deloitte generates approximately 30% of other services in other services segments, such as SI and managed services, and was able to increase such revenues compared to the decline in management consulting. The strategy consulting companies here on the graph, BCG and McKinsey, they increased revenues in systems integration, but those activities for the two companies are growing from a significantly smaller revenue basis compared to their management consulting business, which still represents approximately 89–99% of total revenues in 1H20. IBM Services has been challenged by revenue declines across multiple segments, such as application services, infrastructure services, and technology support services. But there have been some pockets of growth in consulting activities related to hybrid cloud and artificial intelligence. And now I want to hand it over to Boz to briefly provide some color on Accenture and Deloitte.
Sure. Thank you, Elitsa. Yeah, I mean, as Elitsa pointed out, just to start with Accenture, so the data here that's shown on the graph is for 1H20, and for Accenture, they were kind of rolling into a relatively strong, it was like a 1Q20 essentially was the midpoint of their fiscal year. They were coming in from a very strong bookings prior to that, and really a momentum in consulting, which kind of helped them to offset some of the headwinds that they faced into the 2Q20, and kind of the overall performance for 1H20 was relatively stable. However, we saw a further deceleration in the second half of the year, with consulting and strategy and consulting really declining mid-single digits. So something that we will expect to see further pressure through the end of 2020. Accenture is optimistic for rebound in the consulting domain, especially as they really ramp up their fiscal year 2020 at the end of August with a record-breaking consulting bookings. So now it's a matter of them converting those bookings into cash, which the company anticipates to start rolling in and seeing some of the performance improvement in the second half, more like in the mid of 2021. So we'd expect them to finish fiscal year 2021 on a strong note. Of course, there's a long way to go there, and there's certainly some macroeconomic factors that they have to address. But what the companies really doing internally is they continue to embed analytics and security modules to support some more of the IT infrastructure modernization efforts, and really focusing and doubling down on cloud-related discussions and investing in cloud consulting talent, training and screening cloud consulting talent. So it's in places some big bets on cloud consulting, and which they expect to see some better and faster conversion as they focus on more broader digital transformation engagements. For Deloitte, as Elitsa pointed out, the SI and managed services engagement is a small but very rapidly growing area of the overall services revenue. I'll speak a little bit more in details for Deloitte in a moment. But in a nutshell, Deloitte is really again, they also have like a tale of two quarters for in 1H20 in terms of their management consulting revenue. It felt like the company being more on the crossroads between deciding where they want to be, how much they want to put emphasis on just pure consulting engagements versus more in the implementation and managed services, kind of resulted in them losing some deals, as well as walking away from some deals as well, because they were not tasked and given the opportunity to go from just pure consulting. They were really looking for the long tail opportunities in the managed services space. So this is some of those headwinds have put some pressure on the pure management consulting revenues growth for Deloitte, but certainly it's giving some pockets of opportunity as overall the firm is still growing, just not in just the pure management consulting space. With that, I'll turn it over back to Patrick.
Excellent. Thank you, Boz and Lisa. And so now we've had the numbers. Now we're going to look at some of the trends that are happening. And as I mentioned, hybrid delivery is, and we all recognize that remote delivery has been happening for years across services. I think that the real change is not just what came with the pandemic when everyone was forced to work from home and deliver remotely, but what's been happening since, say, midsummer, even earlier, where that shift has been to how do we combine delivering remotely and delivering in person in a way that still brings the same kind of value to clients around consulting, around digital transformation. And I think for a lot of the companies, a lot of vendors that we're talking to, it's still very much a work in progress, trying to learn how to develop something more than just a rule of thumb about what works best, but actually some true best practices and how different kinds of engagements can be weighted differently with respect to how much of it is done remote and how much is done in person. I think a second trend I didn't mention at the start because I got distracted myself about talking about products and software is where, and it does tie in, is the partnerships and how the consultancies and their technology partners, so think AWS, Google, Microsoft, think about all the other technology partners out there, how those relationships have changed. They were changing before the pandemic, and there were a number of consultancies that were sort of taking a step back and evaluating exactly what their alliance structure should look like, who they should be partnering with more, what were the ways that the partnerships could evolve. But the pandemic, accelerated that, like it accelerated a lot of things. And so now we're seeing that first there was the opportunity to reevaluate, and then after that, there was an opportunity to really consider how partnering is going to work going forward. And it's influenced by hybrid engagements, of course, but I think it's also influenced by the way that clients are looking for a different kind of relationship between their consultancy and their technology partner. And honestly, and Boz can talk on this if you'd like to a bit, the change in the way that the technology partners themselves see the opportunities around consulting, around services, around providing the kind of strategy roadmaps and the kind of engagements that used to be solely within the confines of the strategy consultancies and those kind of firms. And then the last one, as I mentioned before, is climate change. And we'll talk specifically about a couple vendors that are really doing more on that particular trend in that particular area. And so with that, let's before we get to that, let's do a quick poll question, because it's something we all talk about a lot. It's something we talk about a lot in the context of consulting, and also for us as analysts, something that has a huge impact on our year, and that is travel and the lack of it. So when you look ahead to what your travel is going to be, your business travel in 2021, are you anticipating not traveling, maybe after June when things are better, less than 2019, or like it's back to 2019? I think some people have the idea that they're going to make up for it in 2021. And then, there are there are AR, VR technologies that allows better interaction with clients in a very different way. And again, that's something Boz will talk about in a bit when we get to that section of it. So we'll give you the results of that survey in just a little bit. But first, let's get to some of the specifics around these companies. And I think we'll go to Elitsa first to talk a bit about Capgemini. Elitsa?
Yes, Capgemini is one vendor example that we wanted to share around the hybrid delivery model. So when the pandemic began to spread globally in February-March timeframe, Capgemini shifted approximately 95% of its workforce to deliver services from home. And since then, Capgemini has begun pursuing a people-centric transformation that essentially adjusts the resource management to a new work model. And there's still a lot of that 95% of people working from home is still applicable to date. One of the principles of the new model is to provide employees with a flexible work policy. And as such, all the employees, no matter what service line or geography they are located in, are eligible for flexible work that can include working from home or following a part-time work or a compressed schedule. It's also asking its employees to be anchored to one specific office, because collaboration within the office is very important. So as they're really depending on the pandemic trends and their ability to communicate in person, employees are required to occasionally go to the office on site and collaborate with their peers. Also establishing a combination of physical and digital, now called phygital, which is actually becoming a term that we're hearing from other vendors as well in space. So that phygital workplace is now enabled through cloud-based virtual collaboration and immersive meeting rooms, is becoming a part of that transformation to a new working model for Capgemini, and enables the connectivity and interaction between people who are on site and work from home. So the new virtually enabled model ensures that global resources are allocated efficiently regardless of their physical location of talent. This model improves Capgemini's ability to access skills and experts in domains and to staff the right resources for projects no matter where they are located. And at the same time, increases employee opportunities to enrich their work experience and to progress in their careers. I want to move to the next trend, partnerships and Deloitte with Boz.
Thank you, Lisa. As Patrick pointed out, there are all the partnerships, the evolution of how services vendors manage the relationship with the technology partners is becoming more and more relevant and more important, especially as we see many of the partners, technology partners, developing professional services arms, which in some cases are becoming really a threat to the traditional services model. So, it's part of our digital transformation research. We did some deep dives into some of the hyperscalers as well, the big technology vendors, professional services arms, and it's really about how those organizations are thinking, for the future, and not just, for the transaction that they are engaged with today, perhaps on one-off engagements. Buyers to see some opportunities to continue to engage with professional services arms in areas like more complex and higher value technology and more complex architecture from a technology standpoint. As of right now, though, they don't see, the hyperscalers or technology vendors being the buyers as something that they would solely outsource to them, but it's certainly something to keep an eye out for. And we have highlighted here Deloitte as an organization that is, as I mentioned earlier, has been really on a crossroad between deciding how much they want to stay within the pure management consulting realm and how much they want to go and how much to really rely on technology partners. They certainly rely a great deal, and we've seen with them pushing and doubling down building their AWS practice. We know they have very substantial SAP practice as well as Oracle practice. And in recent times, the AWS practice is certainly something has become really central to the overall cloud performance in the cloud consulting business and the cloud implementation and whatnot. And it's, as I said, as while the relationship appears to be healthy and growing, AWS too is also developing the professional services arms. And I think, part of what Deloitte, just in the recent announcement came through was Deloitte actually formed a strategic alliance with AWS professional service organization, which we believe is also the result of them trying to protect their own turf and trying to go to market in a very specific manner and trying to delineate and separate labor for who is doing the consulting, who is doing the implementation, who's doing the managed services, data hosting, and so forth. So an alliance like this certainly addresses our point here around Deloitte avoiding blind spots, and it's certainly something that we will expect to see more from other service organizations and trying to be a little bit more exclusive within particular domain areas. So, for example, that partnership with Deloitte and AWS Professional Services is around mainframe or workload migration. Deloitte is really staying on the front, on the top end of the services with the consulting and advising. And there's some toolkits that they're using for deploying and managed services. But AWS professional service organizations will be really involved on the infrastructure side and really the data management side. So it's a good way to start to think about where, how those partnerships evolve, especially as the organizations on both sides are really reaching out to the same technology and services budgets at the end of the day. So that's kind of on the partnership side. On the climate change side, I want to kind of transition into that particular domain area, and I'm going to speak a little bit about Accenture, and I'll let Elitsa and Kelly expand on the Capgemini and UI. But as we talked about, decarbonization is a part of a corporate social responsibility program, but it's also becoming a little bit more a tangible focus right now for many of those organizations and starting to be tied into particular cost savings and impacting the operating cost structure of those organizations. So for a company like Accenture, they have had several initiatives over the last few years, over the last decade, that Accenture has been doing and tying some cost savings overall from a budget spend perspective. But most recently, they announced their initiative around achieving net zero emission by 2025, which is really focused on powering the offices with 100% renewable energy. They also have, as part of that initiative, they have moved to zero waste, which is, again, reusing and recycle 100% of e-waste, like all the computers and servers, any kind of a device that they might be using, as well as focus on plan for water risk and kind of like, making sure that there's enough water supply and kind of like that's part of the CSR, the corporate social responsibility. And as I mentioned, Accenture, it's nothing new for Accenture, as the company has been, investing and tying into specific cost savings back in, I have to say. So Accenture was reporting that since 2007, so what, 13 years now. Their company has accumulated over $500 million in energy savings as a result of reducing its carbon dioxide emissions by 1 million metric tons. So savings like this and numbers like this, we expect to start seeing more from those vendors as we think about not just from a CSR perspective, but also from an operations perspective, but also then offering it as a service from a consulting point of view, so kind of creating a new channel, a new entry point for pushing their broader consulting-led portfolios. Without turning over to Elitsa and Kelly for speaking about Capgemini and EY.
Thank you, Boz. Capgemini is one of the companies that's also been very vocal about climate change and the effects of its business and clients' business on climate change, and been similar to Accenture, working for a long time now, and has been part of the corporate social responsibility around protecting the environment. So now there's new, more clear goals that were announced by the company in 2020 around achieving carbon neutrality, and the goal is to get to that level in 2025 and to become a net zero emissions business by 2030. So the company is active in two fronts. So the first area is to address this in terms of its internal operations, using levers such as digital workplace initiatives, reducing business travel and commuting. And those three areas actually have been reinforced by the pandemic in the past few months. Rolling out hybrid and electric cars as part of the fleet, switching to 100% renewable electricity, and also reducing and offsetting the impacts of its own supply chain. So those levers are for internal operations, but at the same time, it's been looking at revenue streams from decarbonization services. So expanding activities with clients in that regard and launching new clear offerings around carbon decarbonization for clients, and applying its technology expertise and industry expertise and all the lessons learned from Capgemini's own transformation to help clients drive down carbon emissions. I know there's a goal to save 10 million carbon tons by 2030 for clients, which is 20 times higher than Capgemini's operational carbon footprint in 2019. Kelly, would you like to cover EY?
Sure, thanks, Elitsa. EY has similar plans as well. Their goal was to be carbon neutral throughout its global operations. And some of the key areas that they were focusing on to reduce their footprint and improve their carbon emissions was around travel, so reducing their travel, as well as sustainable procurement. They also want to increase the use and development of renewable energies. Aside from looking at internal operations, EY was also looking to drive sustainability for its own clients. So it's using its sustainability strategy to innovate with its clients, to show them different technologies and show them how to use that technology to reduce their emissions. Part of their carbon neutral reduction plan, it also includes including the measurement and the reporting of their total carbon footprint. So they're really tracking to see what types of improvements. I know they've been tracking it for the past few fiscal years to really see if it's improving and how they can do better with their carbon footprint. They've also developed different staff who are educated and they have skills around sustainable technologies and around this renewable area to help further advancement. I think some of the ways that they're trying to really show the sustainability and really show their clients how they can use technology to create sustainability. It's really coming through in a lot of their investments and how they're engaging with clients. They had opened an innovation studio, but through a virtual environment. So they're still going to work with clients to show them technologies, but they're using the virtual environments to immerse them in research settings that will help to develop technologies, co-innovate around technologies, but also while doing it more sustainably. Another vendor I want to call out for climate change is also BCG. More recently in September, BCG had announced its goal to be net zero, have a net zero climate impact by 2030. They have similar focuses. They're focusing on direct energy and electricity, but again, they're also looking to reduce their business travel. Their goal is to reduce their business travel by 30% by 2025, and something beyond just becoming net neutral. BCG is also looking to become climate positive, so they want to remove more CO2 than they're producing, and that goal is by 2030. As part of their plan, they're also pushing forward with a $400 million investment into enabling climate change throughout. So they're going to focus on their own teams to enable their teams to drive this climate impact and climate change and help their own clients as well as governments throughout different industries, as well as establish more coalitions to really push forward and help their clients and help their regions really expand around sustainability and work towards the net zero goal. So with that, I'll hand it back to Boz.
Actually, I'm going to take it over for a second because we're going to see the poll results. And so looking ahead to travel in 2021, okay, nobody's going to make up for 2020, and no one's going to travel like it was 2019. And sort of a split kind of even there along the way. Interesting how many people are looking to use AR and VR, so that ties in well with what Boz is about to talk about. And I'll share this personally. I think I'm in the very first category. Really not at all in 2021, but we'll see. My mind might be changed depending how things go. All right, with that, let's go to Boz to tackle the next part of this. Boz?
Sure, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I was just trying to assess and see where I would be in those categories. I might be okay after June, but we'll see how things progress. So the next couple of slides, we want to kind of touch base on a particular area that has enabled and has really fueled the growth within management consulting through 2018-2019 timeframe, which was really around customer experience, advisory-led opportunities, which is largely, the entry point around improving the sales and marketing, the front-end office. And we know we've spoken in previous webinars in many ways how many of the consultancies have invested in creative agencies, talent that has helped them to think differently, think outside the box, and engage in a different way, at least for introducing new portfolio offerings. So that particular part of our research is part of our digital transformation portfolio, and we look very closely to 19 vendors. Many of them are also part of the management consulting research, but there's also others that are like pure marketing and services agencies that are really creative services. It's core to their portfolios as well as advertising services, and trying to kind of match and get a sense for what is really happening within that particular domain area. So the graph here on the slide shows this is the 4 service lines that we look in what we call digital marketing services benchmark: strategy, creative branding, web, mobile, commerce, advertising, analytics. So the first 2 are really the one, if you can think about, that front-end CRM kind of a consulting, operations consulting, and improving the spaces is that strategy and creative and branding are really tied very closely to that particular area within the management consulting space. And as you see, the growth has decelerated significantly from a year ago. No surprise for many of you, but it's just something. It's really another proof point of the impact of the pandemic and the traditional kind of a high-touch advisory model and the consulting model that those agencies and services providers were used to seeing really high growth areas, just driven by the improving of the customer engagement, customer interactions, right? So what we see and what we think is really happening in terms of some of the dynamics within the last 6 months as a result of COVID is that the convergence of strategy and technology really continues to benefit the vendors that are seeking to drive those interactions with the buyers and invest in some new services to enable some conversations. Some of those non-management consulting companies, but more on those agencies like Publicis Sapient is a good example. They launched a business content streaming services in the UK, while Ogilvy, another large global agency, part of the WPP holding company, launched a new consulting practice in Canada, which is kind of an indication how some of those agencies are taking advantage of market consolidation. We know that many of the Big Four and other management consultancies had to lay off people as a result of the COVID, so those agencies are kind of coming and trying to take some advantage and try to think of new ways of interacting with the buyers. Also, we see vendors ramping up offerings to ensure they can capitalize on the demand for assistance and the adoption of new technologies, specifically for the AR and VR and AI-enabled voice and video solutions. We know we all are and have been, likely continue to be on Teams and Zoom and Slack and everything else, which essentially increases the need for application connections between first and third-party data, and especially once COVID abates. So there's some kind of a, push for introduction, but also how do you then go up beyond, using those technologies and knowing of those technologies and how do you connect with those so you can kind of return to growth in those areas and drive more strategic engagement as a result of those technologies. So one company that's, part of, has started to do just a couple of vendor examples in that particular area. AKQA, another really technology-focused agency, has demonstrated some of its creative capabilities They launched a new Nike ad, which is really encouraging its customers to use AR technologies to customize some of the outwear. And it's an interesting way because it's a way of kind of introducing the technology and encouraging from a B2C perspective. But if you have to draw some parallels in comparison back 10 years ago, we all got like, oh, wait, what's going to happen with jobs and how things will be if we have to interact with AI and automation tools and yada, yada. But as our personal experiences started to improve, we're largely enabled by using social media for our personal lives and on a daily basis and start getting more comfortable using similar tools in our work lives as well. So we can see kind of a laying the ground that foundation works and think about someone like, AKQA as an organization using the Nike commercial and trying to encourage the consumers to use AR and VR, to use some of those technologies for changing and trying outwear as a way of, okay, maybe now I'm comfortable using the sets. Maybe I can start using those as well in my workplace as well. And, it's going to take time, but there's certainly some examples of how vendors are, although the accelerating growth in the last 6 months, they're certainly putting some investment dollars and some, trying to engage with some of the brands as they think about the next wave of opportunities once kind of COVID kind of abates. So that's on what happened in the last 6 months, really the drastic deceleration and growth in those two really entry points for strategy and creative services, which we believe, still be important moving forward. But just kind of recap and show the picture of like a really high growth space, a year ago, and now it's like really pretty much down to nothing because the marketing advertising dollars were slashed significantly as a result of COVID. So without turning it to the next slide, please, so we can kind of look and see the future, how we think about it. So the graph really here is about our forecast in that particular domain, which is, the digital marketing services. Again, those same 4 service lines are outlined here. And as you can see, we are kind of bullish on both strategy and creative and branding as the 2 of the highest growth service lines, essentially, through 2024 rather. Obviously, the 2020, 2021 dip, kind of the 2019, 2020 dip is kind of a capture there. You can see the flattish to declining revenue across all categories. But we believe there's certain trends that will help to rebound that growth. So what we see from a strategy perspective, and there's a couple of areas that we believe will drive a strategy within the digital marketing services. First, buyers will continue to orient any advisory spend towards brand awareness, especially as creating the business value to address brand health challenges, and especially brands that are able to integrate digital into offline experiences remain a critical connection, especially as the COVID really had widened the gap between the brands and the consumers. So brand health and brand awareness is one big area that will demand and fuel some opportunities for strategy and discussions. The other area is buyers will continue to seek, especially the ones that are further mature in the digital transformation continuum, they'll seek some guidance for implementing customer experience frameworks that are enabled by the emerging technologies, including AI and ML, to optimize their back office and supply chain operations. So that will certainly present an opportunity for vendors with broad-based relationships across the C-suite, especially, that trust once that COVID kind of rebound comes out. You need to make sure you're there, you know your name, and you can still execute as long, as those vendors are able to convince the buyers that they share the inter-departmental data. That's always been the case, and always been the challenge. So it's kind of like, I want to make sure the internal departments are starting to collaborate better with each other. So those are kind of 2 big trends, brand awareness and brand health on the strategy, as well as opportunities for connecting front and back office operations as a result of new technologies. On the creative side, another area again from some of the growth factors, that will result after the COVID headwinds. Really true to really testing new ways to provide, personalized and then human-centric messaging. That's as much as technology is there in enabling those discussions, interactions. We see those creative mindsets and creative briefs coming and testing new ways. So we're starting to see some examples already, but one way to think about it is how the trend is fairly nascent. Creating some short documentaries will overtake the traditional advertising and marketing campaigns as long as vendors are able to connect human experiences through a short story, while they incorporate the behavioral, professional, purchasing, and the social data. And that will actually help to generate and kind of feed back into that brand awareness without sounding as a traditional ad. And I think that's kind of that connecting, understanding what's the offline experience, what the online experience, how brands are able to think about it, and using some of the technology, again, creating short documentaries, telling a story rather than trying to make a major push into a particular brand. I think that will be key as long as all these data connections are made. So I want to kind of highlight those two areas because we do believe, once kind of COVID, the dust around COVID settles, there's some kind of opportunities for customer experience-driven consulting discussions to rebound, which also impact back resurgence into overall management consulting revenues and feeding back into the discussion on hybrid engagement model and how those vendors capitalize on the investments in talent and infrastructure and everything in between, essentially, so we can see a better market opportunities 2021 and forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Excellent. Thanks, Boz. So just to clarify what we've been talking about, what some of the research is that's out there that's available to you, here's the management consulting benchmark coverage. The actual benchmark itself will be published at the end of next week, but we've already published a bunch of the different profiles that you see on the companies on the far left. So that is one thing you can access, and then another part of our research stream is what Boz has been talking about around digital transformation. And this was last year's and the year before. We have 2 years worth of this portfolio now under our belt. We're going to change things a little bit in 2021. Important to note that there is a December Voice of the Customer product that'll be coming out, I think, at the end of next week as well. So with just about a few minutes left, we're going to take some questions. We have one in here. Pretty straightforward. Can you talk about what IBM's split means for its consulting business? I will definitely turn that to Elitsa.
Thank you, Patrick. IBM's split on the services business side reflected mostly the global technology services sector, which does not include management consulting revenues that we cover in this benchmark, as those activities reside within the global business services unit of IBM services. And this global GBS unit is going to remain within the new IBM and the new IBM services after GTS's infrastructure services areas are split into a new company over the next year. Essentially, for GBS, there is no change in the portfolio, so there's no change in the coverage in terms of offerings and resources, so that won't be changing the mechanics of management consulting activities for IBM. What will change is the direction in which management consulting will go, because for the new IBM, hybrid cloud and artificial intelligence are becoming even more important now. Areas such as application transformation, migration to the cloud, and modernization are definitely growing in importance in relation to the hybrid cloud expansion activities for IBM. So I expect what this means for IBM's management consulting business is that there's going to be more technology, strategy, work regarding application transformation and regarding the implications of moving and modernizing applications to the cloud, enabling transformations through new technologies such as artificial intelligence, but not only limited to artificial intelligence, as well as the other emerging technologies such as 5G and blockchain, IoT. So there's definitely going to be more technology-enabled transformations that are driven and led by management consulting work for IBM services.
Excellent, thanks. So we have another question that's come in, and again, please feel free to send more. We should be able to get to all of them in the time we have. In terms of hybrid delivery in Capgemini, how are remote workers able to make use of immersive technologies enabled in the office? So let me talk for a moment about sort of the very big picture here. I think Boz can tackle the immersive technologies part, and then maybe some extra thoughts from Elitsa, since she's our lead on Capgemini. I just want to say that at the beginning of the pandemic, and we all went through this, but the emphasis was on safety first, and then productivity a very close second to that. So that's part of why at the beginning I said how hybrid delivery is such an ongoing, changing thing right now, because a lot of the vendors, a lot of consultancies, the first priority was, how do we make sure our people are safe? Can we make, very closely after that, how can we make sure that they're working and are as productive? And now we're well into the phase of, okay, if this is what it's going to look like, this combination of in-person and remote delivery, these hybrid engagements, now how do we make those things work better? And again, it's fits and starts. It's kind of rules of thumb right now, not necessarily best practices. But Boz, some thoughts maybe on the immersive technologies part of that?
Yeah, I mean, we have certainly we've seen and heard, not just Capgemini, but in general, many vendors using like AR and VR technologies as a way to train, as a kind of a training tool. That's kind of really the low-hanging fruit at this stage of the game, where, hey, here's a headset, here's, the immersive environment. You can actually deploy some applications that are focused on training and development. That's really a lot of it. We have actually published a report on AR and VR as part of our emerging technology series, part of a digital transformation portfolio back in August, focus on exactly that, use cases for AR and VR, and kind of go a little bit more into the kind of the spectrum and the continuum from training and development all the way to predictive maintenance, and really what are the implications for industrials and all that. And it's kind of the need for not just vendors doing things on their own from a service perspective, but the need for broader collaboration and really understanding of who's part of the ecosystem, from hardware to software, especially on the hardware side, and developing applications for that hardware side. You're talking about different types of skill sets like gamers and folks like that are a little bit different than management consultants. But bringing it back to the question, and specifically for talent and working for remote employees, as long as vendors are able really to establish a commonality in terms of a training and development and comfort level for using those technologies, I think this is the next phase will be started to be deployed and used for supporting services, especially in specific areas like like in industrial settings and things in that nature. That certainly bears a lot more questions around security and connectivity and protocols like that, but I think it's more about, first and foremost, about the change management component and making sure that the services providers, employees are ready to do that, the type of engagement at scale. And I think internal adoption is very important, and that's what we start seeing from more vendors, and not just Capgemini, but Accenture and others as well. Elitsa, did you have something to add on Capgemini?
I'm not fully, I don't fully have the details around the mechanics of how Capgemini does the actual delivery and use of immersive technologies if they are enabled from the office. But my, understanding is that those technologies are not only limited to your device that the headset device. So they can be, there are solutions and applications that can be accessed from any environment. They can be VR, AR, they can be accessed from tablet, they can be accessed from desktop or browser. So it really depends exactly what the company specifically is using, and in that regards, the other vendors as well, to make sure that the population and their employees are able to efficiently access the tools and the platforms that are utilized internally to support, and the same applies to customers as well, to support collaboration through immersive technologies.
Excellent, thanks. So another question that's come in is specifically about Accenture and whether or not we have seen, let me read the question here. Have you seen any impacts from Accenture's reorganization? I think that's from earlier in the year. Boz, that's definitely in your wheelhouse. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the immediate change that we have seen has been some disruption, and no surprise for many of you in terms of executive departures. That's kind of like whenever there's a shakeup, that's kind of the natural first thing that you may observe. And I think one of the notable ones that we have seen has been departing of someone like Omar Abash, going from Chief Strategy Officer to now lead my Microsoft cross-industry solution group, and it's going back to the comments around partnerships and start thinking how those hyperscalers are building their professional services arms. That's a good example of thinking of someone like Bosch's background coming on board to Microsoft and helping build that arm as well. But in terms of performance, I think Accenture still remains kind of really focused as much as their P&L is geocentric. It's really about delivering and developing more of that deep industry domain expertise that they know for in many of the areas. So that has certainly helped them to kind of keep them intact with their previous performance and how they perform now. As I said, their growth kind of declined in the second half, of 2020 for the most part, but their bookings were looking very promising at the end of the summer. So I think they are ramping up and then slowing down on the innovation side and the acquisition side. So on that front, not much change. I think the most notable one has been some of the executive departures.
Excellent, thank you. So another question that's come in, and we have time just really for this last one because it's a big one. Which of the big four are furthest ahead in their cloud alliances and capabilities? It seems like almost every one of them lists AWS as an alliance partner. I'm 90% sure EY is AWS's auditor. So which makes me think they don't have an alliance partnership with AWS. I know EY is has become a very big Microsoft shop over the years, and we've seen in going to their Wave spaces, which they are equivalent of an innovation and transformation center, that Microsoft has become more and more prominent, and EY's story around their relationship, I think, is something that they feature increasingly. But Boz, maybe some thoughts from you first on Deloitte and AWS, and actually maybe spin off to a little bit into maybe what we're seeing from AWS and Google and Microsoft in terms of their services practices. Boz?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier, especially for Deloitte AWS practice, it generates about half of their cloud revenue overall. So it's certainly a key cornerstone of their partner strategy, and it's really something that they've doubled down. Their AWS practice, they've kind of doubled it in size in terms of practitioners and delivery resources over the last couple of years. Now over 7,000 plus employees. So it started back in a few years ago as part of the Australia practice, but certainly has permeated and has taken a little bit more of a global approach. So AWS certainly is a good example of how they're trying to build and double down in terms of alliance partnerships. I think just to kind of draw a quick comparison before I go into the hyperscalers comments that I made earlier, is if you think about how Accenture does its business groups with all these vendors, right, with all technology vendors, and you may say, well, it seems like Accenture is the most advanced in terms of a relationship. The big four don't seem to have the exclusivity and in terms of like the shape of a structured business group similar to Accenture. But we still believe that they have a really tight relationship. It's more of a pointed relationship and specific when developing specific industry solutions, and especially in industry verticals that those big four are really strong at, and it's something that they really need that kind of a formal org structure around it, but it's certainly something that still gives them an advantage against even someone like Accenture or IBM or some of these centric vendors in that regard. But again, going back, I think we mentioned a couple of occasions that the evolution of the hyperscalers and the technology vendors and the expectations of those vendors from their services partners, it's really important because they are trying to see, how how the relationship changes, what are the KPIs, what are the buyers' expectations, and how well each and one partner with each other. So I think buyers, they still, what's happening on the buyer side is that they are looking for separation of labor, and they want to make sure that when a service organization come into discussion and bring in the technology vendor and vice versa, everyone knows their role and there's no overlap, because buyers want to keep, certain referees and certain players. They don't want the referee to be a player as well. And it's something that we keep hearing more and more from buyers, that that's something that services and technology vendors need to figure out before they come to pitch new offerings to them.
Excellent, thanks, Boz. And I think we answered the question. If not, the person who asked it is welcome to reach out to any of us. We can connect and give you a bigger, longer answer. Please, next week, if you are around and still working, on Thursday around the same time, we'll be doing 3 ways hybrid engagements will change consultants' innovation and transformation centers. So we're talking about Deloitte's greenhouses, PwC's experience centers, EY's wave spaces, Atos's BTICs, Capgemini's applied innovation exchanges, all that, and the way that what we talked about with respect to hybrid engagements is going to change how those places operate. So join us next week. You'll get a note to take a survey, and thank you all for joining. Sorry we kept you long. Take care.